The night was crisp with frost, as Lord Alaric Drackle strode through the remnants of the village. Snowflakes drifted from the obsidian sky, settling on the bodies that littered the ground like broken dolls. Their blood turned the pristine snow into crimson pools, still warm enough to melt small hollows before freezing into garnet crystals. The scent of death hung heavy in the air, metallic, sweet and intoxicating to his heightened senses. 300 years of existence had not dulled the thrill of a successful hunt. If anything, time had only sharpened his appetite for destruction. Alaric's boots crunched over the frozen earth as he surveyed his coven's handiwork. 20 vampires under his command had descended upon this isolated mountain settlement like a plague of shadows. None had been spared. Men, women, elderly, all food for his insatiable family. A satisfied smile curved his pale lips. The moonlight caught on his prominent incisors, still stained with the blood of the village elder who had foolishly attempted to bargain for his people's lives. There was no bargaining with the alpha of the Carpathian coven. There never had been. "My lord," a voice called from behind him. Katerina, his lieutenant for the past century, approached with measured steps. Her once white dress was now painted with splashes of red, her raven hair falling loose around shoulders that still heaved with the exhilaration of feeding. "The village has been purged. We found no survivors." Alaric nodded, his glacial blue eyes scanning the massacre with detachment. "Good. Burn it. Leave no trace. The humans will blame it on bandits or wolves." His voice was deep, carrying the faint accent of ancient nobility long forgotten by the modern world. "As you command." Katerina bowed, a gesture of submission to the vampire who had ruled their coven since before the Renaissance had touched these remote Transylvanian mountains. As his followers began to set fire to the thatched roofs of the humble dwellings, Alaric wandered toward the village church, a small wooden structure that had offered no sanctuary to those who had desperately fled inside. Its door hung from a single hinge, splattered with evidence of the violence that had occurred within. The interior of the church was a tableau of horror. Pews overturned, holy icons smashed, bodies draped across the altar. Alaric felt nothing as he observed the devastation. Centuries ago, he might have experienced remorse, but those human sensibilities had been burned away by time and power, leaving only the cold calculation of a predator at the apex of his reign. He turned to leave when a sound caught his sensitive ears, almost imperceptible, but distinct against the backdrop of crackling flames and distant howling wind. A heartbeat, rapid and frightened, like a trapped bird. Alaric tilted his head, following the sound to a small trap-door in the floor near the altar. A hidden cellar. How quaint! With negligent strength, he tore the door from its hinges and peered into the darkness below. Huddled in the corner of the earthen cellar was a child, a girl no more than 7 years old, with large, terrified eyes that reflected the dim light filtering from above. Her small body trembled violently, whether from cold or fear he couldn't tell. Probably both. "Come here!" Alaric commanded, his voice silken yet undeniably threatening. The child didn't move, frozen in place like a rabbit before a wolf. Impatience flashed across Alaric's aristocratic features. With fluid grace, he descended the short ladder into the cellar, his tall form seeming to fill the cramped space. The girl pressed herself further into the corner, clutching something to her chest. A worn doll with button eyes and a stitched smile that seemed mockingly cheerful in the face of death. "Your hiding place was clever," Alaric remarked, crouching before her. "But nothing escapes me for long." Up close, he could see she was thin to the point of malnourishment, her collarbone protruding beneath a threadbare dress. Her hair was a tangled mess of copper curls, and freckles dotted a nose that turned slightly upward at the tip. Despite her fear, there was something defiant in the set of her small jaw. "What is your name, child?" he asked, more out of idle curiosity than genuine interest. She remained silent, but her heartbeat accelerated, drumming a frantic rhythm that called to the hunter in him. "No matter," Alaric shrugged. "Names are unnecessary for food." As he reached for her, the girl finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "My parents said monsters would come one day." Alaric paused, something in her words pricking at a memory long buried. "And what else did they tell you about monsters? That they have no souls?" Her voice trembled but grew stronger. "But Mama also said even monsters were once children who were hurt." For the first time in centuries, Alaric felt something akin to surprise. This half-starved orphan, for surely she was one even before his coven's attack, was attempting to reason with him. The absurdity almost made him laugh. "Your mother was a fool," he said coldly, "and her foolishness did not save her." The girl's eyes welled with tears, but she held them back with remarkable control. "She wasn't my real mother. My real parents died when I was a baby. No one wanted me, so the village took turns caring for me." Ah, so his instinct was correct. An orphan, passed around like an unwanted parcel. For some inexplicable reason, this revelation made Alaric hesitate. He had been an orphan once, in a time so distant it seemed to belong to another person entirely. Before the transformation, before power, before endless night became his domain. "Please," the girl whispered, "I don't want to die alone in the dark." Something stirred in the hollow cavity of Alaric's chest. Not compassion, for that emotion had withered long ago, but perhaps a shadow of recognition. A memory of another frightened child, centuries past, begging for mercy that never came. "What is that you're holding?" he asked, nodding toward the doll clutched in her small hands. The girl looked down as if surprised to find it still there. "Isabel. She keeps the nightmares away." "Does she?" Alaric's lips curled into a bitter smile. How ineffective she proved tonight. To his astonishment, the child extended her arms, offering the doll to him. "Maybe you need her more than I do." The gesture was so unexpected, so absurdly innocent, that Alaric found himself momentarily speechless. This child, surrounded by death and facing a monster from humanity's darkest nightmares, was offering him comfort. The irony was exquisite. Against all reason, against 3 centuries of merciless predation, against the very nature he had embraced so completely, Alaric made a decision that would alter the course of countless lives. "What is your name, child?" he asked again, his voice different now, still cold but less cutting. "Elena," she replied, lowering the doll to her lap. "Elena," he repeated, the name tasting strange on his tongue. "Today is your rebirth day, Elena. Remember it well." Before she could respond, he had scooped her into his arms and ascended from the cellar in one fluid motion. The church was now engulfed in flames, the heat intense even for his cold skin. Wrapping his cloak around the child to shield her from both the fire and the sight of her slaughtered neighbors, Alaric strode through the blazing doorway into the night. Katerina spotted him immediately, her eyes widening at the bundle in his arms. "My lord?" "The child lives," Alaric stated, his tone brooking no argument. "She comes with us." Murmurs rippled through the gathered vampires. In 3 centuries, Lord Dracul had never shown mercy, never taken prisoners, never spared a single human life. Yet here he stood, cradling a mortal child like some precious cargo. "But my lord," Katerina ventured, "what purpose could this human serve? She is too young for feeding, too small for labor." "She is mine," Alaric cut her off, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "Question me again, Katerina, and I will remind you why the humans whisper my name in terror." The female vampire immediately bowed her head in submission. "Forgive me, Alpha. I meant no disrespect." Alaric turned away from his confused coven, looking down at the child in his arms. Elena's eyes were wide open, staring up at him with an expression he couldn't decipher, not quite fear anymore, but a wary curiosity. "Sleep," he commanded softly, using the mesmerism that came naturally to his kind. Her eyelids grew heavy instantly, and she drifted into unconsciousness, still clutching her doll. As the village burned behind them, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, the vampires began their journey back to their mountain fortress. Alaric led them, the sleeping child a strange weight in his arms, physically insignificant, yet somehow heavier than anything he had carried in centuries. He told himself it was mere whim that stayed his hand. Perhaps he would make her a pet, or raise her as food for later, or simply tire of her and discard her once they reached the castle. Yet deep within, in a place he had long thought dead and decayed, something flickered to life, fragile as a candle flame in a tempest. 15 years passed in the ancient stronghold of Castle Dracul, perched like a vulture on the highest peak of the Carpathian range. 15 years in which the girl-child grew into a young woman under the watchful eyes of a coven that alternated between resentment, fascination, and predatory interest. Elena learned quickly that to survive among monsters, one must make oneself useful. By age 10, she could read and write in 5 languages, having devoured the contents of Alaric's vast library. By 12, she knew the properties of every herb in the castle gardens and could brew potions that even the vampires found valuable. Mixtures that allowed them brief exposure to sunlight or eased the burning thirst between feedings. Now at 22, she moved through the castle with quiet confidence, her copper hair falling in waves to her waist, her once thin frame now possessing the graceful strength of a woman who had carved out her place in a realm of nightmares. The doll, Isabel, still sat on a shelf in her chambers, button eyes watching over her as she slept. Alaric had never explained why he spared her that night, and Elena never asked. Their relationship existed in a strange purgatory between master and ward, captor and willing captive. He provided for her every material need, educated her in ways no human woman of the era could dream of, and most importantly, he protected her from the other vampires who might have drained her dry at the first opportunity. In return, Eleanor became indispensable to the coven, the daylight eyes of the night-bound creatures, the keeper of records, the brewer of remedies, the voice that could speak to the few humans they needed to interact with without inspiring immediate terror. But as she blossomed into adulthood, Elena became increasingly aware of Alaric's gaze following her movements. Lingering longer than necessary, something had shifted in their dynamic. Something unspoken, but palpable. She was contemplating this change as she worked in her herb room one evening, grinding dried wolfsbane with mortar and pestle. The fortress hummed with unusual activity. Messengers had been arriving all day with news that put the entire coven on edge. A shadow fell across her workbench, and Elena didn't need to look up to know who it was. Only one vampire moved with such silence that even the air seemed afraid to stir around him. "You should be in your chambers." Alaric's voice was soft but commanding. "It's not safe tonight." Elena continued her work, keeping her eyes on the purple dust forming beneath her pestle. "When has it ever been safe here, my lord?" The corner of his mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile he ever displayed. "Insolence does not become you, Elena." "On the contrary," she replied, finally meeting his gaze. "I believe you find it refreshing after centuries of blind obedience from your followers." Something dangerous flashed in his ice-blue eyes, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Alaric moved closer, examining the herbs spread across her table. His presence was overwhelming in the small room, tall, imposing, emanating the cold power that had only grown more formidable over the years she had known him. "War is coming," he said abruptly. Elena's hands stilled. "The southern covens?" Alaric nodded once. "They believe I have grown weak, that sparing a human child was the first sign of my decline." His eyes fixed on her with unsettling intensity. "Perhaps they were right. You are many things, Lord Dracul," Elena said carefully, "but weak has never been one of them." "No?" He reached out, one pale finger tracing the line of her jaw with feather-light pressure. "Then how do you explain yourself? Still breathing, still warm, still human after all these years under my roof?" Elena suppressed a shiver at his touch. Perhaps I am more valuable alive than dead. Perhaps, he murmured, though he sounded unconvinced. But Vladimir Bathory and his coalition do not see it that way. They see only that the Alpha, who once bathed in the blood of entire villages, now keeps a human as... What? A servant? A pet? A conscience? What am I to you? Eleanor asked, the question escaping before she could reconsider its wisdom. Alaric withdrew his hand, his expression becoming unreadable. A mistake I cannot bring myself to correct. He turned toward the door. Pack what you need. You leave tonight. Alarm shot through Elena. Leave? For where? Away from here. The castle will be under siege by dawn. I've arranged for Nikolai to take you to the coast. From there, a ship will carry you to England. You're sending me away? The hurt in her voice was unmistakable. Alaric's back stiffened. I am ensuring your survival. Bathory will show no mercy to anything I value. The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Value. After 15 years, it was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging what she meant to him. I won't go, Eleanor stated, setting down her tools with deliberate calm. This is my home. These are my battles too. Alaric turned back to her, anger flashing across his perfect features. You are human, Elena, fragile, mortal. You cannot hope to stand against what's coming. Perhaps not alone, she countered. But I've spent 15 years learning the weaknesses of your kind. I've created weapons you don't even know exist. Curiosity briefly overshadowed his anger. What weapons? Instead of answering, Eleanor moved to a locked cabinet in the corner of her workroom. With a key she kept around her neck, she opened it to reveal rows of vials containing liquids of various colors, bundles of herbs bound with silver wire, and several objects that resembled jewelry but gleamed with unnatural purpose. I've been preparing, she said simply, not just for external threats, but for the day your coven might turn on me, or on you. Alaric stared at her arsenal, genuine surprise evident in his expression. You've been keeping secrets, little orphan. I learned from the best. Elena lifted a vial of crimson liquid that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. This can immobilize a vampire for hours. This, she pointed to a necklace set with a black stone, can detect their presence even when they use mesmerism to hide. For a long moment, Alaric was silent, reassessing the woman before him, no longer the frightened child he had spared on a whim, but something altogether more complex and dangerous than he had realized. You still cannot stay, he finally said, though with less conviction. The southern covens believe you weak because you showed mercy once. Elena pressed her advantage. Prove them wrong by turning that mercy into strength. Show them that the orphan you spared has become your most unexpected weapon. The weight of her words hung between them like a physical presence. Outside, thunder rumbled across distant mountains, a storm approaching both literal and metaphorical. Alaric moved toward her with preternatural speed, suddenly so close she could feel the chill emanating from his immortal body. If you stay, there will be no going back, Elena. The path you choose tonight will determine whether you live as human or die as something else entirely. Her breath caught as his meaning became clear. After 15 years of maintaining the strange balance between them, the precipice had finally arrived. War was coming, forcing choices that could no longer be delayed. Perhaps, Elena whispered, meeting his gaze without flinching, it's not my salvation you should be concerned with, but your own. The storm that had threatened on the horizon broke over Castle Dracul with apocalyptic fury. Lightning split the sky in jagged veins of silver, illuminating the ancient stone fortress in staccato flashes that cast grotesque shadows across its weathered walls. Rain lashed against leaded windows like desperate fingers seeking entrance. Elena stood at the highest tower, watching the tempest with a strange calm. The winds that howled around the castle carried more than just the scent of rain. They brought the unmistakable metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of smoke from distant fires. Vladimir Bathory's forces were moving through the villages below, leaving devastation in their wake. A calculated insult to Alaric's territory before the true assault began. Enjoying the view. Katerina's voice sliced through the howling wind. Elena didn't turn. In 15 years, Alaric's lieutenant had never bothered to disguise her contempt. I'm counting the fires. 7 so far. 7 villages. Hundreds of mortals. Your kind. Katerina moved beside her, her pale beauty severe in the lightning flashes. Does it trouble you to know they die because of you? Because of me? Elena finally turned, facing the vampire who had wanted her dead since the night Alaric brought her to the castle. Explain your logic, Katerina. I'm curious. The vampire's perfect lips curved in a cruel smile. Bathory would never have challenged Alaric if he hadn't shown weakness. You are that weakness, the human pet he couldn't bring himself to kill. If Alaric's mercy toward one child undermines his 3 centuries of ruthless rule, then Bathory is a fool, Elena replied evenly. And you're a greater fool for agreeing with him. Katerina moved with inhuman speed, her hand suddenly at Elena's throat, applying just enough pressure to restrict her breathing without crushing her windpipe. Careful, little witch. Alaric may have forbidden us from tasting your blood, but accidents happen in war. Elena didn't struggle against the grip. Instead, she reached slowly into a pouch at her belt. They do indeed. Before Katerina could react, Elena pressed a small object against the vampire's wrist, a simple river stone, unremarkable except for the runes carved into its surface and the mixture of herbs and oils it had been soaked in for months. On contact with immortal flesh, the stone began to glow with a dull red light. Katerina screamed, releasing Elena as she clutched her wrist. A burn in the shape of the rune was seared into her marble-white skin. "What have you done?" she hissed, her beautiful face contorted with pain and rage. "Insurance," Elena said calmly, tucking the stone back into her pouch. "The mark will fade in a day or 2. Consider it a warning. Alaric will hear of this. I expect he will, though he might be more interested in why you were threatening me when he specifically ordered the coven to ensure my safety." Elena brushed past the seething vampire, pausing at the tower door. "We face the same enemy, Katerina. Your hatred of me is a luxury we can no longer afford." She descended the winding stone staircase, her heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. The confrontation with Katerina had been inevitable, but timing it just before battle was risky. Still, it was necessary. If she was to fight alongside the coven, she needed to establish herself as more than just Alaric's peculiar charity case. The great hall of the castle bustled with activity as vampires prepared for war. Ancient weapons were being distributed, swords, axes, and maces that had tasted blood across centuries of European conflicts. Alaric stood at the center, issuing commands with the confidence of a being who had survived countless wars. His gaze found hers as she entered, and he beckoned her forward with an imperceptible nod. "Our scouts report Bathory's forces will reach the castle by midnight," he informed her as she approached. The vampires nearby fell silent, watching their interaction with barely concealed curiosity. 400 vampires at least, some as old as I am. "How many do we have?" Elena asked, conscious of the eyes upon them. 173, Alaric replied. "Quality over quantity, but still, the odds are not in our favor, unless we level the field." Eleanor placed her satchel on the great oak table around which the coven's lieutenants had gathered. From it, she withdrew several vials and packets. "These need to be distributed to our strongest fighters." Nikolai, Alaric's most trusted warrior after Katerina, picked up one of the vials, examining the swirling blue liquid inside. "What is this supposed to be?" "Something that will make you faster, stronger," Eleanor explained. "A tincture of wolf's blood, silver dust, and several herbs that grow only in moonlight. It will enhance your natural abilities for approximately 1 hour." Suspicion rippled through the gathered vampires. "Wolf's blood is poisonous to our kind," Katerina said, appearing at the edge of the group, still cradling her injured wrist. "In its natural state, yes," Elena acknowledged. "But properly prepared and balanced with other elements, it becomes a stimulant rather than a toxin. I've been developing it for years." "And who has tested this miracle potion?" Katerina challenged. Or are we to be your unwitting experiments on the eve of battle? Elena met Alaric's gaze across the table. Something unspoken passed between them. Trust, understanding, perhaps even a trace of amusement at the predicament they found themselves in. Without breaking eye contact with Elena, Alaric reached for one of the vials, uncorked it, and drank its contents in a single swallow. The room fell absolutely silent, every immortal present holding an unnecessary breath as they waited to see if their alpha would collapse from poison or worse. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Alaric's pupils dilated dramatically, the blue of his irises almost swallowed by black. The veins in his neck and hands became more pronounced, pulsing with dark energy beneath his pale skin. With a movement too fast for Elena's human eyes to track, he suddenly seized a massive battle axe from the wall and cleaved the oak table in two with a single stroke. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the hall. Alaric stood amidst the destruction, his body vibrating with barely contained power, his expression one of cold exhilaration. "Distribute the vials," he commanded, his voice deeper and more resonant than before. "One to each of our 30 strongest fighters. We save them until the moment of greatest need." The vampires moved quickly to obey, their earlier skepticism replaced by cautious hope. As they dispersed to continue preparations, Alaric approached Elena, moving with a fluidity that made his usual grace seem clumsy by comparison. "You didn't tell me it would feel like this," he said quietly, flexing his hands as if testing their new strength. "Would you have taken it if I had?" Elena countered. "The sensation is intense, I'm told, but it will stabilize soon, and the side effects." Elena hesitated. "Heightened bloodlust afterward, a period of weakness once it wears off. Nothing fatal." Alaric's enhanced eyes studied her with unnerving focus. "You've been planning for war longer than you've admitted." "I've been planning for survival," she corrected. "The two often align." Before he could respond, a horn sounded from the battlements, 3 long, mournful notes that cut through the storm outside. The signal froze every being in the great hall. "They're here!" Nikolai announced unnecessarily, already strapping additional weapons to his body. Hours ahead of schedule, Alaric's expression hardened into the cold mask of the warlord he had been for centuries. "Bathory means to catch us unprepared. Katerina, take 50 to the eastern wall. Nikolai, the same number to the west. The rest form a defensive line in the courtyard." As the vampires rushed to their positions, Alaric turned to Elena. "You will remain in the north tower. It's the most defensible position if the castle is breached. My place is with you," Elena insisted, already gathering her remaining potions and weapons. "The elixirs may need to be administered precisely, and I have other defenses prepared." "Elena," Alaric grasped her shoulders, his enhanced strength requiring visible control to avoid crushing her bones. "If I am distracted by concern for your safety, I will not fight at full capacity. The North Tower has been prepared with your specific weapons and escape routes if needed." She wanted to argue further, but the logic was sound. More importantly, she recognized the expression in his eyes, not the cold calculation of a general deploying his forces, but something deeper, more personal. Fear. Not for himself, but for her. "I'll go to the tower," she conceded. "But promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't die protecting me." Elena held his gaze fiercely. "Whatever happens tonight, my life is not worth yours." Something like pain flickered across Alaric's features. "That," he said softly, "is where we have always disagreed." Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his cold lips to her forehead, the first genuinely tender gesture he had ever shown her. Then he was gone, moving with supernatural speed to command his forces, leaving Elena standing alone in the destroyed great hall, her skin burning where his lips had touched. The North Tower was indeed well prepared. When Eleanor arrived, breathless from climbing the spiral staircase, she found the circular chamber transformed into a fortress within a fortress. Her herbcraft tools had been arranged on a workbench, additional weapons and potions carefully organized along the walls. 3 separate exits had been created: the main staircase, a hidden passage behind a tapestry, and a rope ladder secured to the window embrasure, ready to be deployed down the outer wall. Alaric had planned for her survival with meticulous care. The realization sent a complicated wave of emotions through Elena's chest. For 15 years, she had lived as his ward, his servant, his human curiosity, never entirely certain of her place or her value beyond the skills she had developed. Now, on the eve of a war that might destroy them all, his priorities were suddenly painfully clear. Elena moved to the window, peering through the rain-lashed glass. The courtyard below had transformed into a battlefield. Bathory's forces had breached the outer walls with surprising speed, suggesting they had inside help, a traitor within Alaric's coven. Vampires clashed in blurs of supernatural movement, the sound of their combat rising above even the thunder. Swords and claws flashed in the storm-broken darkness, immortal bodies falling only to rise again unless properly dismembered or impaled. At the center of the chaos stood Alaric, magnificent in his cold fury. The elixir Elena had created enhanced his already formidable abilities to godlike levels. He moved through enemy vampires like death incarnate, his ancient sword cleaving immortal flesh with terrible efficiency. Where he passed, Bathory's forces fell in pieces, their severed limbs and heads scattered across the cobblestones. Yet for every enemy he destroyed, 3 more seemed to take their place. The numerical disadvantage was beginning to tell, even with the enhanced strength of Alaric's elite warriors. Elena watched in growing horror as Nikolai fell beneath a wave of attackers, his head separated from his body by a curved blade. Across the courtyard, Katerina fought with desperate ferocity, her beautiful face twisted with battle rage, her white dress now completely crimson with blood. A sudden movement at the tower door made Elena whirl around, a defensive potion already in her hand. The door burst open to reveal 3 vampires, strangers wearing the distinctive silver emblems of Bathory's southern coven. "The human witch," the tallest one said, his lips pulling back from fangs that seemed unnaturally long. "Bathory will reward us handsomely for bringing him Dracul's pet." Elena backed toward her workbench, calculating her odds. 3 ancient vampires against 1 mortal woman, under normal circumstances, an impossible fight. But these were not normal circumstances, and she was not a normal mortal. "I'm curious," she said, playing for time as her hand found a particular vial behind her back. "Did Bathory send you specifically for me, or are you just opportunists hoping for favor?" The female vampire to the right laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Does it matter, little blood bag? Either way, your protection ends tonight." "My protection?" Elena tilted her head slightly. "Is that what you think I have?" "Protection?" In a fluid motion that surprised even the vampires, Elena flung the vial she'd been holding directly at the floor between them. It shattered with a sound like a thunderclap, releasing a cloud of silvery powder that expanded with unnatural speed to fill the room. The vampires recoiled instinctively, but it was too late. They had already inhaled the particles. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The powder, a refined compound of silver dust, holy water, and the venom of a rare mountain viper, attacked immortal flesh from within. The vampire's skin began to blister and smoke, their screams rising to inhuman pitches as they clawed at their throats and eyes. Elena didn't wait to see the full effect. Seizing a prepared pack of weapons and a heavy cloak, she darted toward the hidden passage behind the tapestry. Just as she reached it, a hand closed around her ankle with crushing force. She looked down to see the female vampire, her face half dissolved by the silver compound, but her strength undiminished, dragging her backward. "If I die," the creature gurgled through melting lips, "you come with me." Elena kicked desperately, trying to break the grip, but vampire strength made it impossible. As she was pulled inexorably back toward the dying attackers, her hand found the small dagger at her belt, a blade forged of cold iron and blessed silver, designed specifically for immortal flesh. With a cry that contained 15 years of pent-up fear and determination, Elena plunged the dagger into the vampire's wrist. The reaction was immediate. The joint separated as if it had been severed, the hand still clutching Elena's ankle, while the vampire shrieked in agony, cradling her smoking stump. Not pausing to think about what she had just done, Elena scrambled through the hidden passage, sealing it behind her with a heavy iron bar. The narrow stone corridor descended through the heart of the castle wall, meant as an escape route for the lords of the fortress during ancient human sieges. It would take her to a small postern gate that opened onto the mountainside, away from the main battle. But as she hurried down the rough-hewn steps, Elena realized she wasn't fleeing away from the battle, she was running toward it. Not toward escape, but back to Alaric. The tower had never been her place, regardless of how well he had prepared it. Her place was at his side, with her potions and her knowledge and whatever strength she could offer. The passageway grew darker as she descended, forcing her to slow her pace to avoid fatal missteps. The sounds of battle grew more muffled, replaced by the steady drip of water through ancient stone and the pounding of her own heart. She was nearing the exit when she heard voices ahead, hushed, urgent conversations, in a language she recognized as the ancient dialect used by the southern covens. Elena froze, pressing herself against the damp wall. The exit was compromised. Bathory's forces had discovered at least this escape route. She would have to turn back, find another way out of the castle. Just as she began to retreat, the words being spoken ahead became clear enough to understand. "Bathory has engaged Dracul directly in the Great Hall," a male voice reported. "The elixir the human gave him makes him nearly invincible. But it's beginning to fade. Our master says to hold all exits, no one escapes." "And the human girl?" another voice asked. "Preferably captured alive. Bathory believes she knows the formula for the enhancement potion, but if necessary, kill her. Dracul must not have any chance to use her skills again." Elena's blood ran cold. Alaric was facing Bathory himself, and his enhanced strength was failing. She had warned him the effects would last only an hour, but in the chaos of the unexpected early attack, that hour was expiring sooner than anticipated. She had to reach him, had to provide another dose of the elixir before his temporary advantage disappeared completely. But how to get past the guards at the passage exit? An idea formed, desperate, dangerous, but possibly their only chance. In her pack were the remaining vials of the enhancement potion, intended for the Coven's elite fighters. There were also several other concoctions she had created over the years, including one she had never dared to test. With trembling fingers, Elena withdrew a small black vial sealed with wax and a silver stopper. Inside was a liquid she had distilled from her own blood, mixed with vampire blood collected in secret over years, along with herbs and compounds that bridged the gap between mortal and immortal. It was a temporary transformation serum, designed to give a human certain vampire abilities for a very brief time, without the permanent change of true turning. It was entirely theoretical. It might kill her instantly. It might work exactly as intended. Most likely, the reality would fall somewhere in between. But Alaric was facing Bathory alone, his enhanced strength fading. The castle was overrun, and Elena had not survived 15 years among monsters by being afraid of necessary risks. With a silent prayer to a god she wasn't sure still listened to her, Elena uncorked the vial and swallowed its contents in one desperate gulp. The pain was immediate and all-consuming, as if every cell in her body were being torn apart and reassembled. She collapsed against the stone wall, biting her lip bloody to keep from screaming and alerting the guards ahead. Fire raced through her veins, followed by ice so cold it burned. Her vision darkened, then returned with frightening clarity, every detail of the dim passageway suddenly visible as if in bright daylight. Her hearing expanded next, the dripping water becoming thunderous, the heartbeats of the vampires ahead, slower than human hearts but still detectable, echoing like drums. And the scent, blood, both fresh and ancient, became a symphony of information telling her exactly how many enemies waited, where they stood, what injuries they had already sustained in battle. When the transformation stabilized, Elena pushed herself up from the wall, testing her new strength. Her movements were faster, more fluid than she had ever experienced. The pack that had felt heavy minutes ago now seemed weightless. Her fear had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something sharper, more focused, a predatory awareness that calculated threats and advantages with cold precision. It wouldn't last long, perhaps 15 minutes if her calculations were correct. Just enough time to break through to Alaric if she moved now. Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling the strange sensation of air she no longer strictly needed filling lungs that processed it differently. Then she launched herself forward, moving with inhuman speed toward the guards who would never expect a mere human to come at them with the night-given gifts of their own kind. The last coherent thought that crossed her mind before she embraced the temporary monster within her was achingly human. After 15 years of Alaric protecting her, perhaps it was finally time for her to save him. The passage Elena had transformed in became her first battlefield. As she burst into the chamber where Bathory's guards stood, their expressions shifted from boredom to shock, then to a primal fear that vampires rarely experienced. They saw in her something unnatural, a human moving with vampire speed, eyes glowing with an unnatural amber light. The scent of her blood changed, yet still undeniably mortal. "What manner of creature?" the nearest guard began, but Elena didn't allow him to finish. She tore through them with an efficiency that would have horrified her human self. The temporary gifts granted by her experimental serum included not just enhanced strength and speed, but an instinctual knowledge of how to fight as immortals did. Her hands found vulnerable points, throats, joints, the soft tissue behind ears, with unerring precision. The guards, expecting at most a frightened human girl trying to escape, were unprepared for the hybrid fury that fell upon them. When the last body collapsed in a twitching heap, Elena stared at her hands in fascination and horror. They were covered in dark, immortal blood that seemed to shimmer against her skin that remained warm and human despite the vampire abilities coursing through her. The dichotomy was disorienting, her mind processing information at supernatural speeds while her heart continued its human rhythm, slightly accelerated by the strain of her transformation. "Focus," she whispered to herself, wiping her hands on her cloak. The temporary nature of her condition meant every second was precious. Already she could feel subtle changes in her perception, suggesting the effects would begin waning sooner rather than later. Orienting herself by sound and scent, Elena tracked the main battle to the Great Hall. The castle's architecture, once familiar after 15 years, now appeared different to her enhanced senses. She perceived hidden weaknesses in walls, caught ancient bloodstains that had been painted over centuries ago, felt the very heartbeat of the fortress that had been her prison and her sanctuary. As she approached the Great Hall, the sounds of an epic confrontation grew overwhelming to her sensitive ears. Blade against blade, immortal flesh tearing, the distinctive hiss when vampire blood met air, all amplified to a cacophony that threatened to distract her. Elena forced herself to filter the input, focusing on a single sound she had become attuned to over 15 years. Alaric's voice, now raised in what could only be described as a battle roar. She slipped through a servant's entrance, emerging onto a balcony overlooking the main hall. The scene below was apocalyptic. Bodies of vampires from both covens littered the floor, many still moving as they attempted to reattach severed limbs or heal grievous wounds. In the center, a cleared space had formed around two figures locked in combat that moved too quickly for even most vampires to follow clearly. Alaric and Bathory circled each other like ancient gods of war, their movements blurring even to Elena's enhanced vision. Bathory was slightly taller than Alaric, with raven-black hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes that glowed blood-red in the dim light. His fighting style was aggressive, relentless, driving Alaric backward with each exchange. And Elena could see what the vampire guards had reported. Alaric was weakening. The elixir was fading from his system, his movements becoming fractionally slower with each passing minute. Around them, the remaining members of both covens fought their own battles, but all eyes repeatedly returned to the central duel. This was how power shifted in the vampire world. Alpha against alpha, the victor claiming territories, resources, and followers. Elena scanned the hall, noting with a pang that Katerina was still fighting, though clearly wounded. Her right arm hung useless at her side, nearly severed at the shoulder, yet she continued to battle 3 opponents simultaneously with her left. Of Nikolai there was no sign, confirming Elena's fear that he had indeed fallen in the courtyard. Her assessment complete, Elena calculated her approach. She needed to reach Alaric without being intercepted, deliver the second dose of elixir, and retreat before her own transformation reversed. The balcony offered a direct route, if she dared to take it. Without allowing herself to reconsider, Eleanor vaulted over the stone balustrade, dropping 20 feet to the floor below. She landed in a crouch that would have been impossible for her human body, absorbing the impact through muscles temporarily reinforced by immortal strength. Several nearby vampires turned at her arrival, nostrils flaring as they detected her strange hybrid scent. "The witch!" one of Bathory's followers hissed, lunging toward her. Elena evaded him with preternatural speed, her only focus the path to Alaric. She dodged and weaved through the melee, her movements too fast for most to track, her purpose too urgent to be delayed. When enemies appeared directly in her path, she used the small arsenal of weapons she carried, silver-edged daggers, vials of compounds that burned immortal flesh, even her bare hands when necessary. She was halfway across the hall when Alaric's voice cut through the chaos, a sound of pain she had never heard from him before. Elena's enhanced vision focused on the central duel, in time to see Bathory drive a slender blade through Alaric's shoulder, pinning him momentarily to a wooden column. The Southern Alpha's face was triumphant as he leaned in close to his opponent. "Did you truly believe your pet human's potion would save you?" Bathory's voice carried easily to Elena's sensitive ears. "I've spent decades studying your weakness, Dracul. How the great Alpha, who once massacred entire regions, now plays nursemaid to a mortal girl." Alaric's response was to rip himself free of the impaling blade and counterattack with renewed ferocity, but Eleanor could see the truth. His movements were now barely faster than Bathory's. The elixir had all but worn off. She doubled her speed, abandoning caution as she cut directly through the battlefield. A female vampire from Bathory's coven appeared before her, fangs bared in a hiss of challenge. Without breaking stride, Elena flung one of her prepared vials directly into the creature's face. The glass shattered, releasing a compound of concentrated garlic oil and silver nitrate that caused the vampire's features to blister and melt instantly. "Alaric!" Elena's voice carried across the hall with impossible strength, drawing the attention of both Alphas. Bathory's red eyes widened in shock as he registered her approach, not running with human limitations, but moving as one of his own kind might. "Impossible," he breathed, momentarily distracted from his duel. Alaric seized the opening, driving a vicious attack that forced Bathory back several paces. His ice-blue eyes found Elena, comprehension and alarm warring in his expression as he recognized what she must have done to acquire such abilities. Elena reached into her pack as she ran, withdrawing the precious vial of blue elixir. 20 feet separated her from Alaric now. 15, 10. She could see the wounds Bathory had inflicted, a deep gash across Alaric's chest, the puncture in his shoulder, a portion of his left ear missing. But he was still fighting, still undefeated after 3 centuries of absolute rule. 5 feet. Elena's fingers closed around the vial, preparing to throw it to him across the remaining distance. Her lips parted to call his name again. That's when Katerina appeared, directly in Elena's path. The female vampire's beautiful face was a mask of fury and determination. Her wounded arm had been completely severed now, the stump cauterized by some enemy's flame. But her remaining hand functioned perfectly as it closed around Elena's throat. "Clever little witch," Katerina hissed, lifting Elena off her feet. But not clever enough. Even with her temporarily enhanced strength, Elena found herself overpowered by the ancient vampire's desperate grip. The vial of elixir remained clutched in her hand, now just out of throwing range to Alaric. She kicked and struggled, feeling her windpipe beginning to collapse despite her supernatural resilience. "He chose you!" Katerina's voice broke with emotion. Not just rage, but a profound grief that startled Elena even through her oxygen-deprived haze. 3 centuries I served him, loved him, killed for him, and he chose a human child over his most faithful lieutenant. Understanding flooded Elena's fading consciousness. It had never been simple hatred that motivated Katerina's animosity. It was jealousy, heartbreak, 300 years of unrequited devotion shattered by Alaric's inexplicable mercy toward a village orphan. As blackness threatened the edges of her vision, Elena made a decision that would change the course of the battle. With her last strength, she brought her hand up, not to fight Katerina, but to press the vial of elixir into the vampire's remaining palm. "Save him," Elena choked out. "Please!" Confusion crossed Katerina's perfect features. She looked down at the vial, then back at Elena's face, her grip loosening just enough to allow a painful breath. "You would give this to me," Katerina whispered, genuine bewilderment in her voice. "Knowing what I would do to you, I know what you'll do." For him," Elena managed, each word a struggle against the crushing pressure on her throat. "That's all. That matters now." Something shifted in Katerina's expression. A calculation, a reassessment, perhaps even a reluctant respect. She released Elena, who collapsed to the floor, gasping for air that her enhanced body processed with unnatural efficiency. "This changes nothing between us," Katerina said coldly, clutching the vial. Then in a blur of movement she was gone, racing toward the center of the hall, where Alaric now fought with his back literally against the wall, Bathory pressing his advantage with merciless precision. Elena pushed herself up, her temporary abilities already beginning to fade more rapidly. The confrontation with Katerina had cost precious minutes of her transformation. She could feel her muscles weakening, her senses dulling incrementally as her body began rejecting the unnatural changes she had forced upon it. Across the hall, she witnessed Katerina reach Alaric's side, moving with the fluid grace that had made her his most effective lieutenant for centuries. Without breaking stride, the female vampire ducked under Bathory's guard, threw the vial of elixir directly into Alaric's mouth, and then placed herself between the 2 alphas, absorbing a strike meant for her master. The blade that would have pierced Alaric's heart instead impaled Katerina through her chest. Her remaining hand clutched Bathory's wrist, preventing him from withdrawing the weapon as Alaric consumed the elixir behind her. "For my alpha," Katerina's voice carried across the hall as her body began to disintegrate around the wound. "For my love," Bathory snarled, trying to dislodge his blade from Katerina's dissolving form. "Foolish female. Your sacrifice buys him seconds, nothing more." But those seconds were enough. The elixir hit Alaric's system with the force of a lightning strike, his body absorbing its power with far greater efficiency the second time. His wounds began to close, his muscles swelled with renewed strength, and his eyes blazed with cold blue fire that seemed to illuminate the hall. With a roar that shook dust from the ancient rafters, Alaric launched himself at Bathory, moving faster than even vampire sight could track. His first blow sent the Southern Alpha crashing through a stone pillar. His second separated Bathory's right arm at the shoulder. His third drove a fist directly into his opponent's chest, fingers closing around the immortal heart within. Elena watched in mingled horror and awe as Alaric lifted Bathory by his heart. the Southern Alpha's feet dangling above the floor, his red eyes wide with disbelief. "You came to my territory!" Alaric's voice was deeper than Elena had ever heard it, resonating with power that seemed to vibrate the very stones of the castle. "You slaughtered my people. You threatened what is mine." Bathory, even in his death grip, managed a bloody smile. The great Lord Dracul, undone by sentiment for a human girl. "How far you have fallen, old friend." "Not fallen," Alaric replied, his grip tightening visibly. "Evolved." With a single, vicious motion, he tore Bathory's heart from his chest. The ancient vampire's body convulsed, his mouth opening in a silent scream as his limbs began to crumble into dust. Alaric held the still-beating heart aloft, his gaze sweeping the hall where combat had frozen as both covens witnessed their leader's final confrontation. "Your master is defeated," Alaric announced to Bathory's followers, his voice carrying supernatural command. "Pledge fealty to me now, or join him in oblivion." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Vampires from the Southern Coven fell to their knees, heads bowed in submission. Some looked relieved, suggesting Bathory's rule had perhaps been even more brutal than Alaric's. Others seemed calculating, already adjusting to the new power structure. But none challenged the Alpha, who stood victorious, holding their former master's heart as it gradually turned to ash in his grasp. Elena, now struggling to remain upright as her transformation rapidly reversed, felt a wave of nausea overtake her. The hybrid state had taken a terrible toll on her mortal body. Blood trickled from her nose and ears, and each heartbeat sent daggers of pain through her chest. She had known the risks, had calculated that the temporary abilities were worth the aftermath, but the reality was more excruciating than she had anticipated. As her enhanced senses faded, the great hall seemed to elongate and distort, sounds becoming muffled as if she were underwater. She saw Alaric's head turn toward her, saw recognition and alarm cross his features. His mouth formed her name, though she could no longer hear it clearly. He moved toward her with elixir-enhanced speed, but even that seemed to slow as Elena's consciousness began to slip away. The last sensation she registered was the cold strength of his arms catching her as she collapsed, and his voice, somehow cutting through the encroaching darkness, calling her back with desperate intensity. "Eleanor, stay with me." "Elena." Consciousness returned in fragments, disjointed sensations and sounds that Elena's mind struggled to assemble into coherence. First came awareness of softness beneath her, then the scent of beeswax candles and dried herbs. A cool cloth on her forehead, voices murmuring nearby, too low to distinguish words, but familiar in their cadence. When she finally managed to open her eyes, she found herself in her own chamber, in the North Tower. The room was dimly lit by candles, the windows shuttered against what her internal sense told her must be daylight. Her body felt simultaneously leaden and hollow, as if she had been emptied out and refilled with something heavier than her natural substance. "You're incredibly foolish," Alaric's voice came from beside the bed, startling her, "and equally brave." Eleanor turned her head with effort, finding him seated in a chair pulled close to her bedside. He looked different. Still the immortally beautiful predator she had known for 15 years, but changed in subtle ways she couldn't immediately identify. "Did we win?" Her voice emerged as a cracked whisper. A smile flickered across Alaric's features, a genuine expression of amusement so rare that Eleanor momentarily wondered if she were dreaming. "Yes, Bathory is destroyed. His coven has sworn allegiance. Our losses were significant, but less than they might have been." Memory returned in a rush. The battle, her transformation, Katerina's sacrifice. "Katerina," Elena whispered. "She saved you." Something complex crossed Alaric's face. Grief, respect, perhaps regret. Yes. After 3 centuries of faithful service, she gave her final loyalty to ensure my survival. He paused, studying Elena with unnerving intensity. "Just as you risked your life with that reckless transformation serum." Elena tried to push herself up against the pillows, but found her strength completely depleted. Alaric moved with inhuman speed to assist her, his cold hands gentle as he adjusted her position. "How long have I been unconscious?" she asked, noting the untouched food and water on the bedside table, the multiple candles at different stages of burning. 3 days, Alaric replied, his voice neutral but his eyes betraying concern. "Your heart stopped twice. The second time I thought—" He trailed off, looking away briefly. When he turned back, his expression had hardened. "What you did was unforgivably dangerous. That serum could have killed you." "But it didn't," Elena pointed out, "and it got the elixir to you through Katerina. It worked." "At what cost?" Alaric demanded, sudden anger flashing in his eyes. "Do you understand what you've done to yourself? The transformation, even temporary, has altered your blood chemistry permanently. You're neither fully human nor vampire now. Your lifespan, your abilities, your vulnerabilities, all changed in ways we cannot yet determine." Eleanor absorbed this information with surprising calm. Perhaps she had already suspected. The hollow feeling, the strange heaviness, the sense that her body was now operating by different rules. "So I'm what? A hybrid? A dangerous experiment," Alaric corrected sharply. "One that has placed you in a precarious position within our world. News of what you did has spread through both covens. Some view you with fear, others with fascination. Still others—" He hesitated. "Still others see you as an abomination that should be destroyed." "And what do you see?" Elena asked quietly, meeting his ice-blue gaze directly. The question hung between them, charged with 15 years of unspoken complexities. Alaric's expression shifted through several emotions before settling into something Eleanor had never witnessed before. Vulnerability. "I see the child I couldn't kill," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "Who grew into a woman who saved me when she could have escaped, who changed everything I thought I understood about power and weakness." He reached out, one cold finger tracing the line of her jaw with exquisite gentleness. "I see a miracle I don't deserve and can't explain." The raw honesty in his words left Elena speechless. For 15 years, Alaric had maintained careful distance, their relationship defined by boundaries neither acknowledged openly. Now those boundaries seemed to have dissolved, leaving them in uncharted territory. Before she could formulate a response, a commotion erupted somewhere below. Shouts, the clash of weapons, the distinctive sound of vampire bodies moving at full speed through the castle. Alaric was on his feet instantly, his posture shifting from vulnerable companion to lethal predator in the space of a heartbeat. "Stay here," he commanded, moving toward the door. "What's happening?" Elena struggled to sit up further, her body protesting every movement. Alaric paused at the threshold, his expression grim. "It appears some of our guests are not as reconciled to their new allegiance as they pretended to be." His eyes met hers one final time, conveying a warning she understood immediately. "Lock the door behind me. Use your weapons if necessary. Trust no one." As he disappeared in a blur of movement, Eleanor forced herself from the bed, ignoring the waves of dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. She managed to drag herself to the door, securing the heavy iron lock before collapsing against it. The sounds of conflict intensified below. Through the wooden floor, she felt the vibrations of supernatural combat shaking the very foundations of the castle. Something was very wrong. The battle with Bathory was supposed to be over, the succession established, the threat eliminated. Unless... A terrible suspicion formed in Elena's mind, a possibility so dangerous she could barely allow herself to consider it. What if Bathory's attack had never been about territorial expansion or coven politics at all? What if it had been a diversion, a sacrifice play for something more valuable? Gathering her remaining strength, Eleanor pulled herself toward her workbench where her journals and notes were kept. She had to confirm her theory before it was too late. If she was right, Then Alaric had just walked into a trap engineered not by Bathory, but by someone far more cunning, someone who had used the Southern Coven as pawns in a deeper game, someone who now had exactly what they wanted. Alaric separated from Elena, fighting a battle on the wrong front while the true threat closed in from an unexpected direction. The iron lock would not be enough. Elena knew this with bone-deep certainty as she dragged herself toward her workbench. Her transformed blood had left her with something beyond human instinct, a preternatural awareness that whispered of approaching danger. The distraction below wasn't random. It was orchestrated. With trembling fingers, she pulled open her oldest journal, leather-bound, its pages yellowed with 15 years of observations, experiments, and theories about vampiric nature. There, on page 73, she found what she sought, her notes about an ancient ritual mentioned in texts she'd discovered hidden in the deepest recesses of Alaric's library. "The Crimson Ascension," she whispered, tracing the words she'd transcribed years ago. "Performed once every 5 centuries, when the blood moon aligns with the winter solstice, requires the heart of an alpha vampire and the blood of a human who has walked between worlds." Eleanor's gaze darted to the window. Tonight was the winter solstice, and she had indeed walked between worlds with her transformation serum. A soft scratching at her chamber door froze her in place. Not the sound of a vampire demanding entry. They would simply break through. But something more insidious, something patient. "Who's there?" Elena called, reaching for a weapon. "A friend," came a melodic female voice. "One who can help you understand what you've become." Elena remained silent, her mind racing. The voice was unfamiliar, yet carried an authority that reminded her of Alaric. Ancient, powerful, accustomed to obedience. "I know you can sense the truth, child," the voice continued. "Your blood has awakened to new realities. The battle below is not what it seems. Alaric faces betrayal from within his newly expanded coven, yes, but the true architect of tonight's events has yet to reveal herself." "Herself?" Elena whispered, pieces falling into terrible place. The lock on her door began to glow with an unearthly crimson light, the metal warping and melting as if touched by impossible heat. Elena backed away, clutching her journal to her chest, her other hand gripping a vial of her most potent defensive compound. When the lock finally dissolved completely, the door swung open to reveal a woman of such ethereal beauty that Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Tall and willowy, with hair like spun platinum that fell to her waist, the stranger wore a gown of shifting midnight blue that seemed to contain actual stars in its fabric. Her eyes, though, her eyes were the most arresting feature. Completely black, without whites or iris, like twin portals into the void. "Hello, Elena," the woman smiled, revealing delicate fangs, unlike the more prominent ones of normal vampires. "I am Lilith, the first of the blood, and you, my dear, are the final piece of a puzzle I've been assembling for 500 years." Elena flung the vial without hesitation. The glass shattered against an invisible barrier inches from Lilith's face, the potent mixture harmlessly dripping to the floor where it sizzled against the stone. "Impressive craftsmanship," Lilith remarked, gliding into the room with inhuman grace. "Your potions would kill any ordinary vampire. But I am no ordinary vampire, as I suspect you've already deduced." "The mother of all vampires," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Believed to be myth even among your own kind." "Not myth, merely selective about my appearances." Lilith's smile deepened as she circled Elena with predatory interest. "For centuries, I have watched Alaric Dracul rule these mountains with cold efficiency. Imagine my surprise when he spared a human child. The first act of mercy in his blood-soaked existence. I knew then that you would be special. And how spectacularly you've proven me right." Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. "You've been manipulating events from the beginning. Bathory's attack. A necessary sacrifice." Lilith shrugged elegantly. "Vladimir was ambitious but ultimately disposable. His desire for Alaric's territory made him easy to influence toward confrontation. But why? Elena demanded, her mind working frantically to find an escape, a weapon, anything that might work against this primordial creature. What could you possibly gain from this conflict? Lilith reached out with impossible speed, her cool fingers catching Elena's chin in a grip that was gentle yet utterly inescapable. You, my dear, or more specifically, what you've become. The Crimson Ascension requires blood that has crossed the threshold between mortal and immortal without full transformation. Such blood is exceedingly rare, once every few centuries perhaps. And yet here you are, having created the very serum I would have spent decades cultivating in a chosen vessel. Elena tried to pull away, but Lilith's strength was beyond anything she had encountered. Even Alaric, at his most powerful, seemed a pale shadow compared to this ancient being. Alaric will kill you for this, Elena threatened, though even to her own ears it sounded hollow. Lilith laughed, the sound like silver bells. Sweet child. Who do you think taught Alaric everything he knows about immortality? Who guided his early years after transformation? Who shaped him into the perfect alpha to rule these mountains until I had need of him again? Horror washed through Elena. You're his maker. His maker, his mentor, his first love, Lilith confirmed, releasing Elena's chin to stroke her copper hair with unsettling familiarity. Though he likely believes I perished centuries ago, I find it useful to retire periodically, watch from the shadows as my children evolve, intervene only when necessary. A crash from somewhere deep in the castle momentarily drew Lilith's attention. Elena seized the distraction to lunge toward her workbench, where a small crossbow lay loaded with a bolt she'd designed specifically to pierce immortal flesh. She never reached it. Lilith's hand closed around her throat, lifting her effortlessly off the ground. Enough of this. Time grows short, and the ritual awaits. What? Ritual? Elena gasped, clawing futilely at the iron grip around her windpipe. The Crimson Ascension grants its performer dominion over all vampire bloodlines, Lilith explained, with the patience of an immortal who had witnessed millennia. Currently, my children remain autonomous. Alphas like Alaric rule their territories without answering to me. But once every 5 centuries, when the celestial alignments are correct, I can reclaim absolute control. Her black eyes gleamed with ancient ambition. Tonight, with your hybrid blood as catalyst and Alaric's alpha heart as sacrifice, I will once again be the unquestioned queen of all vampire kind. Elena's vision began to darken around the edges, not from Lilith's grip, which had carefully loosened to avoid killing her, but from the horror of understanding. Alaric's heart, the final component of the ritual. He'll never submit, she choked out. He won't have to, Lilith replied, her tone almost gentle. When he discovers I've taken you, he'll come willingly to bargain for your life. His devotion to you, however inexplicable I find it, will deliver him directly into my hands. With terrifying strength, Lilith threw Elena over her shoulder like a weightless doll and moved toward the window. We'll conduct the ritual at the ancient circle on the mountain's peak. The alignment occurs at midnight, just enough time for Alaric to discover your absence and follow. As Lilith shattered the window with a casual gesture, Elena felt something stir within her. Not just fear or desperation, but something new. The hybrid blood that now flowed in her veins responded to her surge of emotion, heating and cooling in rapid alternation. Power, different from what she'd experienced during her transformation, but undeniably present, began to gather in her fingertips. Before she could explore this sensation, Lilith leapt from the tower window, Elena still slung over her shoulder. They plummeted toward the ground, the freezing winter air tearing at Elena's thin nightclothes. Instead of the impact she braced for, Lilith landed with feline grace, absorbing the massive fall without effort, and immediately began moving toward the mountain paths at supernatural speed. As the castle receded behind them, Elena caught a glimpse of the battle through its windows. Vampires locked in deadly combat, flames beginning to spread through the west wing, and at the center of it all, a flash of movement she recognized instantly as Alaric, fighting with the desperate fury of a being who sensed a greater threat approaching. "He knows," Elena whispered, more to herself than her captor. Lilith's pace didn't falter as they ascended the treacherous mountain path at speeds that turned the surrounding forest into a blur. Of course he does. The bond between maker and maid never truly dissolves. He's felt my presence since I entered his territory days ago, though he likely couldn't identify why his instincts were screaming warnings. The path steepened dramatically, becoming little more than a goat track that wound through jagged rock formations. Above them, clouds parted to reveal a sky ablaze with stars, centered around a moon that hung low and heavy, its surface tinted with an unnatural crimson hue. The blood moon of the solstice, directly above the ritual site, Lilith sought. They reached a plateau near the mountain's summit, where an ancient stone circle stood in silent witness to centuries of dark ceremonies. 7 monoliths, each twice the height of a man, surrounded a central altar of black basalt. The ground within the circle was bare of snow, as if the very earth rejected winter's touch in this unholy place. Lilith deposited Elena roughly on the altar, the cold stone leaching what little warmth remained in her body. From within the folds of her star-filled gown, the ancient vampiress produced silver shackles etched with symbols Elena recognized from her studies of pre-Roman occult practices. "A precaution," Lilith explained as she secured Elena's wrists and ankles to iron rings embedded in the altar's surface. "Though in your weakened state, hardly necessary. The transformation serum took more from you than you yet realize." Once Elena was restrained, Lilith moved to the circle's edge, placing objects at the base of each monolith. A silver chalice, a curved dagger with a bone handle, a small box that emitted soft whispers when opened, a mirror that reflected nothing, a handful of earth that steamed in the frigid air, a feather that seemed to glow from within, and finally an empty crystal vial waiting to be filled with Elena's hybrid blood. "The 7 elements of dominion," Lilith narrated as she worked. "Earth, air, fire, water, spirit, flesh, and blood. Combined under the blood moon with the proper sacrifices, they will restore my absolute rule. And if I refuse to cooperate?" Elena challenged, testing her restraints and finding them unnervingly secure. Lilith's laugh echoed against the stone circle. "Your cooperation is irrelevant, child. Your blood will flow whether you will it or not. Though if you're hoping Alaric will arrive in time to save you," she glanced toward the path they had ascended, "that would be perfectly acceptable as well. I need you both for the ritual to succeed." As if summoned by her words, a disturbance in the air announced another presence approaching at vampire speed. Elena's heart leapt with hope that quickly died as she recognized not Alaric, but Nikolai, emerging from the darkness. Nikolai, who she had believed dead in the courtyard battle. "My queen," he bowed deeply to Lilith, "the diversion proceeds as planned. Lord Dracul believes the southern faction is attempting a coup, but he has begun to sense the girl's absence. He will follow her scent soon." "Excellent." Lilith's smile was terrible in its beauty. "You have served me well, Nikolai. For centuries you have been my eyes within Alaric's court, reporting his every move, influencing his decisions with subtle manipulations." "You," Elena gasped, staring at the vampire she had considered an ally for 15 years. "You've been her spy all along." Nikolai regarded her with cold amusement. "Did you truly believe Alaric's decision to spare you was his alone? Who do you think ensured you were hidden in that church cellar? Who arranged for the village to be attacked on that specific night, when a certain quality of mercy might awaken in even the coldest heart? You orchestrated everything," Elena whispered, the full scope of the manipulation dawning on her. "My entire life at the castle, A carefully cultivated experiment, Lilith confirmed, though I admit your development exceeded even my expectations. The transformation serum alone would have earned you a place in vampire lore, had anyone but us known of its existence. The strange power Elena had felt earlier stirred again in her veins, responding to her emotions. This time, she didn't fight it, but instead focused inward, exploring this new aspect of herself. The hybrid blood moved differently through her body, not fully human, not fully vampire, but something unique that perhaps even Lilith didn't fully understand. As Eleanor concentrated on this internal discovery, the ritual preparations continued around her. Lilith began an incantation in a language older than any Eleanor had studied, each syllable seeming to thicken the air within the stone circle. The objects at the base of each monolith began to glow with colored light, red, blue, green, white, black, gold, and silver, creating a spectral display that illuminated the ritual site with unnatural brilliance. Nikolai took position at the head of the altar, producing a golden bowl that he placed near Elena's throat. Your sacrifice will elevate our kind to new glory, he told her, almost reverently. For centuries, vampires have existed in fragmented covens, fighting petty territorial battles. Under our Queen's unified rule, we will finally claim our rightful place as the dominant species of this world. Alaric will never accept your rule, Eleanor said with certainty that came from 15 years of knowing the proud Alpha. Even if you take his heart, others will resist. Some will, Lilith acknowledged, approaching the altar with the bone-handled dagger now glowing with eldritch fire. Those who resist will be destroyed. Those who submit will thrive in the new order. But all will obey, once the ritual binds every drop of vampire blood to my will. The crimson moon reached its zenith directly above the stone circle, its light focusing like a spotlight on the altar where Eleanor lay bound. Lilith raised the dagger, its blade catching the blood-red moonlight. With this first blood I begin the ascension, she intoned formally. Just as the blade descended toward Elena's throat, a sound like thunder split the night. One of the monoliths cracked from base to tip, then shattered completely, its fragments blasting outward as if struck by some impossible force. In the gap it left stepped Alaric Dracul, his eyes blazing with cold fire, his body radiating power that seemed to distort the very air around him. "Get away from her!" he commanded, his voice carrying such authority that Nikolai instinctively stepped back before catching himself. Lilith lowered the dagger slowly, a smile spreading across her perfect features. "My beautiful, predictable child. Right on time." "Lilith!" Alaric spoke the name like a curse. "I thought you destroyed in the Constantinople purge." "A necessary deception," she shrugged elegantly. "You needed to believe yourself free of me to develop into the Alpha I required. And how magnificently you've ruled in my absence." Alaric's gaze shifted to Elena on the altar, then to Nikolai standing nearby. Understanding and fury darkened his expression. "My own lieutenant. For how long?" "Since before you made him," Lilith answered. "Nikolai has been mine for 7 centuries. I placed him in your path, knowing you would value his strategic mind." "My lord," Nikolai began, "the future of our kind." Alaric moved with such speed that even Lilith seemed momentarily surprised. One moment he stood at the circle's edge. The next, his hand was buried in Nikolai's chest, fingers closed around the traitor's immortal heart. 3 centuries of loyalty, Alaric growled into Nikolai's shocked face. 3 centuries I trusted you above all but Katerina. Your betrayal dishonors her sacrifice. With a vicious twist, he tore Nikolai's heart free. The lieutenant's body collapsed, already beginning to disintegrate into ancient dust. Lilith observed the execution with clinical detachment. "Impressive. Your strength has grown beyond what I anticipated. The human's elixir, perhaps." Her black eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "No matter. It changes nothing. The ritual requires an alpha's heart. Yours or another's makes little difference. You will not touch her again, Alaric stated, moving to position himself between the altar and his maker. After all these centuries, you still don't understand, my child. Lilith's voice held genuine regret. I shaped you. I can unmake you just as easily. What followed was a confrontation beyond human comprehension. Two immortals moving at speeds that rendered them nearly invisible, their conflict marked only by the destruction left in its wake. Stone shattered, earth cratered, the very air seemed to ignite and freeze in alternating waves as powers beyond mortal understanding collided. Elena, still bound to the altar, used the distraction to focus on the strange energy coursing through her hybrid blood. Closing her eyes, she directed this power toward the silver shackles at her wrists. The metal began to warm, then soften subtly beneath her skin. In the battle raging around her, Alaric was clearly outmatched. For all his power, for all his centuries of experience, he fought against the original vampire, the wellspring from which all bloodlines descended. Lilith toyed with him, allowing him moments of seeming advantage before demonstrating her superior strength with casual cruelty. "You cannot win this, Alaric," she called as she slammed him into one of the remaining monoliths with enough force to crack the ancient stone. "Submit to your queen. Give me your heart willingly, and I will ensure your human pet lives, changed, bound to my service, but alive." "Never," Alaric snarled, launching himself at her again despite the grievous wounds already marking his body. Eleanor's right hand finally slipped free of its restraint. With frantic movements, she reached across to work on her left shackle. The strange power in her blood made the metal increasingly pliant beneath her touch, not melting exactly, but becoming temporarily malleable. As her left hand came free, Elena glanced up to see Lilith pin Alaric to the ground, her delicate hand closed around his throat, her bone dagger poised above his chest. "For what it's worth, my child," Lilith murmured, almost tenderly. "Of all my progeny across the millennia, you were always my favorite." "Lilith!" Eleanor shouted, now sitting upright on the altar, her ankles still shackled but her hands free. "The ritual requires willing sacrifice. You know that as well as I do." The ancient vampiress paused, her black eyes shifting to Elena with renewed interest. "Clever girl. You've studied the old ways well. Let him go," Elena continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Take my blood freely given instead. Hybrid blood, more powerful than anything you could tear from unwilling veins." "Elena, no!" Alaric struggled against Lilith's grip, his eyes wide with horror. Lilith considered the offer, her ageless face unreadable. "And why would you sacrifice yourself for him? He kept you prisoner for 15 years. Used your skills for his benefit, treated you as property." "He saved me," Eleanor replied simply. "Not just that night in the village, but every day since. He taught me to be strong in a world that would have destroyed me. He showed me that even monsters can evolve." Her eyes met Alaric's. "He loved me when he had forgotten how to love anything." Something unexpected flickered across Lilith's perfect features. A recognition, perhaps even a memory of emotions long abandoned. She looked down at Alaric, then back to Elena, reassessing them both as if seeing them truly for the first time. "Love," she pronounced the word, as if testing an unfamiliar taste. "How extraordinary that after all this time, all my careful planning, the one element I failed to anticipate was something as mundane as human love." In that moment of hesitation, Elena acted. The power in her hybrid blood had reached its peak, responding to her desperate need. With a thought, she directed it outward in a wave that shattered her remaining restraints and knocked Lilith backward several paces. Elena leapt from the altar, her body moving with a grace that was neither fully human nor vampire, but something uniquely her own. She placed herself between Lilith and Alaric, who was struggling to rise despite wounds that would have destroyed a lesser immortal. "Enough!" Elena declared, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even her. "This ritual ends now." Lilith recovered quickly, her expression shifting from surprise to calculation. You've bonded with the hybrid blood in ways I didn't foresee. Fascinating, but still insufficient against my power. Perhaps alone, Elena agreed, but not together. She reached back without looking, her hand finding Alaric's as he finally regained his feet. The moment their fingers intertwined, the power in her blood surged exponentially, flowing between them in visible currents of crimson energy. Alaric gasped as it entered him, his wounds beginning to heal at accelerated rates, his strength renewing. Lilith's black eyes widened with the first genuine fear Elena had seen in them. Impossible. The bond between you is something even you couldn't calculate, Alaric finished, now standing fully upright, his body pulsing with the shared energy of their connection. You taught me dominance, Lilith. Elena taught me partnership. And in the end, that makes all the difference. Together they moved as one being, their combined power focusing into a single devastating strike. Lilith, for all her ancient strength, found herself driven backward step by step, her defenses crumbling against an assault unlike anything she had faced in her millennia of existence. As they cornered her against the one remaining monolith, Lilith's perfect composure finally shattered. You cannot destroy me, I am the first blood. Without me, all vampire kind will wither and die. No, Alaric shook his head, his hand still firmly clasped with Elena's. That's the lie you've perpetuated to maintain your power. We will survive without you. We will evolve beyond you. With a final surge of their combined strength, they forced Lilith against the ancient stone. Elena's hybrid blood, flowing through both of them now, ignited the runes carved into the monolith thousands of years ago, symbols of binding, containment, and eternal sleep. Not death, Elena explained as the stone began to envelop Lilith's struggling form, but dormancy, sealed within the earth until the world forgets your name entirely. You'll regret this, Mercy. Lilith hissed as the stone climbed higher up her body. Centuries from now, when you've tired of watching your human pet age and die. That's where you're wrong, Alaric interrupted. Elena's hybrid blood has changed her, changed us both. Whatever future awaits us, we face it together. As the stone completed its absorption of the ancient vampiress, her final words echoed within their minds rather than their ears. All things change. All things end. I will wait. Then she was gone, her perfect form transformed into part of the monolith itself, her features still visible as a relief carved into its surface, eyes closed as if in peaceful sleep. The crimson moon above began to fade to its normal silver hue. The unnatural energies that had saturated the ritual site dissipated, leaving only the cold mountain air and the distant howl of winter winds. Elena felt the power that had sustained her through the confrontation, beginning to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Alaric caught her as her knees buckled, sweeping her into arms that no longer felt quite so cold against her skin. It's over, he murmured against her copper hair. She's contained. For now, Elena qualified, resting her head against his chest where, impossibly, she felt the faintest echo of a heartbeat that had been silent for 3 centuries. The hybrid blood. It's changing you too. For the better, I think. Alaric looked down at her with an expression of wonder. I feel different, more alive than I have since my transformation. As they made their way down the mountain path toward the castle, now quiet, the false battle having ended with Lilith's defeat, Elena contemplated the future that stretched before them. Her blood had irrevocably changed them both, creating something new in the space between human and vampire. What that meant for their lifespans, their abilities, their place in the shadow world of immortals, remained to be discovered. What happens now? She asked, as the castle came into view. Damaged, but standing, much like themselves. Alaric considered the question with the thoughtfulness of a being who had seen civilizations rise and fall. Now we rebuild. Unite the covens under leadership that seeks evolution rather than domination. And perhaps, He hesitated, looking down at her with an emotion he was still learning to name. Perhaps we discover what it means to truly live, rather than merely survive. Elena smiled up at him, reaching to trace the line of his jaw where the faintest flush of colour had begun to appear beneath his marble skin. "I think I'd like that very much, Lord Dracul." "Alaric," he corrected softly. "Just Alaric." As they crossed the threshold of the castle that had been her prison and her home for 15 years, Elena felt the hybrid blood settling into a new rhythm within her veins, not fully human, not fully vampire, but something uniquely their own. A bridge between worlds, a promise of transformation that had nothing to do with potions or rituals and everything to do with the most ancient magic of all, the capacity for change, for growth, for love. In the library, where she had spent countless hours studying the nature of immortality, the doll Isabel still sat on a high shelf, button eyes witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in the long, blood-soaked history of vampire kind: hope.